As I've been saying this morning, the emphasis is on praising God for His goodness and all that He has given us. His blessings are great, even when sometimes the going gets difficult. This is Thanksgiving week, and what I want to do is use Proverbs this morning to really emphasize that whole idea of having a thankful heart. Thanksgiving begins within the heart. Now, I do want to make a disclaimer here that I'm going to be talking a lot about cheer, thanks, joy, having the right kind of attitude. And I want to respect the fact that will be very difficult today and this week for those that, well, as I mentioned earlier, have gone through death, have gone or will be going to the grave. See, I don't want someone to sit there and go, oh, that's easy for him to talk about joy and happiness and be thankful, and I'm grieving. My heart is sick. In Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, the second half of verse 22, we read, it says, a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Now, the Old Testament often uses the idea of bones to express emotion, the feeling that we're having, and a crushed spirit. Or it could be that somebody is right now experiencing extreme poverty. And so when I, in a few moments, read that passage about a crust of dry bread is okay as long as there's happiness. Somebody's going to say, well, that's easy for you to say. That's all I got is a crust of dry bread. And so I want to be sensitive to those who are experiencing a lot of really, really tough times. See, I don't want to come off, you might say, cheesy. I don't want to come off thin or insensitive, that someone hears this message about feeling good, feeling happy, feeling Thanksgiving, hey, and going, don't you realize how much I hurt? I have a crushed spirit. I have a crushed spirit. And because of this crushed spirit, my bones are aching. And so I'd like to have a prayer right now for God to especially minister to those who have a crushed spirit. Lord God, you know that this morning we're going to be talking a lot about Thanksgiving and joy, and well, we've already done it. But we really want to hold in heart, mind, and prayer those who are crushed this morning. And ask, Lord, that you will give that special grace and mercy and peace. And not that they can't take anything from this message, but Lord, that they will not be offended by all the talk of cheer and joy and thinking that perhaps we're insensitive to their pain, because we're sensitive to it. And we pray for peace and strength and courage in Jesus. Amen. But I know that I'm talking to a lot of other people who aren't going through a lot of special problems. Now, we all have, like we saw in that video, we all have special issues. And right now, what the nation is going through, the election, and then there's COVID, and perhaps there is something going on in your family, or you're not going to be able to have Thanksgiving Day. And so, there are those bumps and bruises. But generally speaking, you're a normal person going through a normal period of life. And really that's the person or the persons to whom I'm speaking this morning, because I've been hearing a lot over this past week about troubles and trials. People upset because maybe the person they wanted to get elected didn't get elected, or because they're frustrated because of masks, or they're frustrated because they can't go to the restaurant, or they have to be quarantined, or this, or they can't have the regular kind of Thanksgiving. I've been hearing a lot of that, and that's okay. We've got to be honest about our feelings. But at the same time, I think we need to hear some messages from the book of Proverbs. And in fact, that Proverbs chapter 17 that we just read, the first part of that proverb is very different. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, the first part says, a cheerful heart is good medicine. And so if we, in any way, have been struggling with things that are going on, we need to work on developing a cheerful heart. And so in pondering all of this, I put together a motto. It's what I want to call the motto. The motto for today, for this message, the motto for this week. And the motto goes like this: Thanksgiving begins not what's in the hand, but what's in the heart. Let's just hold that slide there for a moment. So the idea is that my thanksgiving should not be based on what's going on out here. It should be based on what's going on in here. So Thanksgiving, and we're going to read this motto a couple more times this morning, but Thanksgiving begins not with what's in the hand, but what's in the heart. And we see that this is what Solomon had in mind when he wrote some of these Proverbs. For example, Proverbs chapter 15, verse 16. He says, better a little with the fear of the Lord. Now, fear here doesn't mean to be scared of God. It means to hold God in great awe and respect, to have that sense of great awe of God. Better a little with the awe of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Or Proverbs 15, verse 17, the very next verse. It says, better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fatted calf with hatred. Now, I know there's going to be some who would say, I don't eat meat, and so I'm happy with the vegetables. But you get the idea here. Let's put that up there again. It says, better a small serving of vegetables with love. See, now we can put this into the framework of this week. It's better to be at home with your spouse and not with the whole family as long as there's love, rather than maybe getting together with everybody and having a feast, but there's a lot of arguing. Now, not that you would argue if you got together with a family, but see, the idea here is what's going on the inside, which is then also reflected outwardly on the outside. Or Proverbs chapter 17, verse 1. It says, better a dry crust, here's that dry crust passage, with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Now, the idea is not to celebrate or in some way elevate poverty or the lack of something. The idea of these passages is not to say, oh, wow, let's glorify poverty. That's not what the passages are doing. What the passages are doing is they're saying, Lord, help me to take what you have given me and to have peace. Take what you have given me and have joy. Remember that one verse from last week when we were in Proverbs chapter 30? Proverbs chapter 30, verse 8, that said, Lord, give me neither poverty nor riches, but just my daily bread. Because if you give me too much, I might forget about you, thinking I don't need you. And if I have too little, all I'll do is worry about my poverty. And so, Lord, just give me what I need and help me to be content. Help me to, as it said back in that other proverb, help me to have a cheerful heart. As the motto said, Thanksgiving does not begin with what's in the hand, but it begins with what's in the heart. There is that very, very important English word, enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. And I don't know if you know how that word is put together, but it's from the Greek language. En for in, and thu for theos, God. En theos, enthusiasm, is to be in God. That's real enthusiasm. So enthusiasm, to be in God. You see, human nature is such that we become addicted to the usual. Now, I don't mean addicted here in the Friday night, you got to come to recovery kind of sense of addiction. And by the way, we had another good Friday night this past week as we have opened up. But what I mean to addicted to is that we become attached, deeply attached to what is normal, to what is usual, to what is common. And some of you really will understand this, especially if you're a bit older and you worked at a job for maybe 30, 40 years in the same company, and then came the day of your retirement, and there were mixed emotions. You were happy about the gold watch and the cake, but you walked out of that door for the last time. You walked away from that workbench or that office or that building for the last time, that classroom for the last time, and it hurt. There was joy, but also pain. Or if you lived in the same house for 30, 40, 50 years, and then you decided time to sell it and move into the condo. And there was some excitement. I no longer have to cut the grass, and I don't have to shovel the snow, and that sounds pretty good. But you also walked out of that building where you raised your children. The kitchen where the living room, dining room where you had the feasts on Thanksgiving Day. The memories. And so you walked, you see, we become so attached that when we have to leave something or be deprived of something, it hurts. There's pain. And so for many, it has been since March, since they have gone to church. Now, you're watching this morning. We're glad of that. But I've gotten notes from people who say, I really miss being there. I really miss being there. And that's good. But we become attached. We become very attached when we get pulled away. We get pulled away from the restaurant. We get pulled away from common, ordinary living, and we have to be quarantined. My buddy Brian, he usually has everything set for me, but he's been quarantined because he doesn't have COVID, but he was exposed. And so I'm sure if he's watching this morning, hi Brian, probably frustrated. Or the whole wearing of masks thing that I talked about before. Or even toilet paper, right? What we saw on the screen. And so when we suddenly go without, there is a certain level of, well, I wrote down some words here. A certain level of anger. I told someone at the men's Bible study Wednesday morning, oh, you have to wear a mask now to men's Bible study. And they walked out, angry. Confusion, fear, anxiety, frustration, sadness, loneliness. Oh, our shut-ins. Wow, loneliness. But the proverb is saying you've got to live beyond the burden. You've got to look beyond the burden from a heart. Remember that Proverbs 17, a heart that has cheer in it. That's what Paul said in the opening passage that I read out of Philippians chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. And he wasn't saying that because everything was so good, because when Paul wrote that, he was in prison. He didn't get together with the family for Thanksgiving Day that year. Dr. David Jeremiah, I've used his book before. It was about a month or two ago that I used his book Forward. And Dr. David Jeremiah comments on this kind of thing in his book. He said, simply put, our brains are wired to give more importance to the negative than to positive. And so bad events influence our decision-making and our emotions more than positive ones. That means no matter how much we want to succeed and be happy, avoiding bad events can easily become our primary goal, our focus. He says, there have been several times throughout my life that instead of wallowing in worry or fear, fearing about what might happen, I simply paused for a moment and made a decision to change my thinking. And in those moments, I realized I'm much stronger than I give myself credit for. It's a matter of the inner self. Last week in the second service, Pastor Kirsch is doing the second service again today, and he used Proverbs 16, and he talked about the two sides of the coin. He said on one side of the coin, it's kind of like that message I had, live as though God has everything under control. That's one side of the coin. Live as though you are in control of everything, the other side of the coin. And Pastor Kirsch talked about the fact that we have to have both sides of the coin. I need to do what I need to do. Wear the mask, be quarantined, work on having a cheerful heart, be thankful. And yet at the same time, recognize that God has everything under control. And so the motto, once again, the motto says, thanksgiving begins not with what's in the hand, but what's in the heart. Now, there's another aspect of this, too. It's not just a matter of working on my inner being, my inner heart, and not permitting negative circumstances to control me, but rather that I go beyond the negative circumstances and find the joy that the Apostle Paul in Proverbs is talking about. But also how I can take the negative circumstances and use them in a positive way, a creative way. Some of you will remember I used that passage out of Proverbs chapter 14, verse 4, about the ox in the stall. Remember that one? Some of you will remember it. It says, where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox come abundant harvests. Now, the idea of this passage is, if you want a clean stall, don't have an ox. But if you don't have an ox, now this goes back to ancient farming times, you won't have a harvest. So if you want a harvest, you got to have an ox. And if you have an ox, you have to keep it in the stall, and the stall's going to get dirty. It's going to get messy. And so I developed a slogan, a saying, no mess, no ministry. See, the messes oftentimes are the kickoff, the stimulus, the door opener for new ideas, for new challenges. And it could be something very simple during this time of quarantine and no restaurants and all. This past week, I had a breakfast meeting with a friend. And he and I talked about it. We said, what are we going to do? I said, I'll tell you what. I'll stop at McDonald's, pick up 2 big breakfasts. And so we met in one of the rooms of the church here, and we had a great time. So you gotta let the negative stimulate you to think the positive. One of the things that happened is that we had a shutdown Friday night. We had a shutdown Friday and Monday night, recovery. It was the first time in 20 years that we did not have recovery on a Friday night. Otherwise, no matter what, wind, snow, storm, Christmas, whatever, everything always happened on Friday night. And we had to shut it down. Had no choice. So what did Pastors Mark and Greg do? They went, we ought to go online. We ought to stream. Well, now hundreds more are participating in recovery ministry than ever used to be. Wow. In fact, there was a pastor in Pakistan, Kadeem. And Kadeem picked up on the live stream here in Grand Rapids. So he contacted Pastors Mark and Greg, and he asked if they would help to teach the new Christians. Now, this is an extremely Muslim area, heavily Muslim. And so a member of our church put up the money. We bought 140 Bibles. We sent the money, they bought them there, in their language. And look at what's happening here. Look at what's happening. There's Pastor Kadeem. Now, Mark isn't there, he's here. But Pastor Kadeem had a special presentation of these Bibles to the young people who were raised Muslim and are becoming Christian. Next slide. And so they put up the sign, Community Recovery International, free Bibles. The people came. They heard the message of Jesus Christ, And there they are receiving their Bibles from Pastor Kadeem. They had a picture of Mark there. There's a young lady receiving her Bible. And there they are. Look at that. They're waving their Bibles in the air, all happy, celebrating. Now, these are people raised month. They're praying. And now a video.
मेरे जीवन में यीशु तेरा नाम जलाल पाता रहे मेरे जीवन में यीशु तेरा नाम जलाल पाता रहे मेरा उठना बैठना मेरा उठना बैठना चलना
Pastor, I will call you back later. Thank you.
Oh, look at that. Pakistan, heavily Muslim, and they're getting Bibles and messages from us. And that never would have happened had it not been for COVID. Now, I'm not saying COVID is good, but the point is, you use these situations to open the door. You use these situations, for example, say, oh, I can't get together with the family this week. Well, how about picking up some stockings and on Thanksgiving afternoon, instead of being with the family, which would have been good, we're filling stockings. Or maybe writing notes to shut-ins because they're extremely lonely. Writing cards to those who are on the prayer sheet. Prayer sheets are available this morning. And maybe you've never done that before. You say, well, yeah, Thanksgiving Day, don't have a lot going on. So maybe that's what and that could begin something that becomes an important part of your life. And it never would have happened had you not stayed home on Thanksgiving Day with, quote, nothing to do. And so, as we live our lives, these issues, these problems come up. And as Dr. David Jeremiah says, it's easy to begin focusing on the negative. But he also says, when we forget all the blessings God has provided for us in the past, when we forget that, we're apt to minimize his ability to guide us into the future. We may even dread the future and where God is leading us. If so, we're exactly where the devil wants us to be, in a place of avoiding God's leading. Oh, we have little faith. God is leading us into the future. And in what way are the confines, the limitations, the frustrations of whatever might be happening in life, particularly COVID, in this time of year, opening the door to God saying, hey, I got something new for you to do? And here we are in Pakistan. Can you believe it? I watched that, and chills were going up and down my spine. Young people getting Bibles in their own language, and it happened because we had to shut down Friday night. Children love to get gifts. Adults love to give gifts. Lord, may I be a gift. Or as our motto says, Thanksgiving does not begin with what is in the hand, but with what is in the heart.